Yeah, I'm back. Let's talk about streaming. What is the value of it? Is it worthwhile? How worthwhile is it? I think Michael Bolton has been hard at work figuring it out. Mick?
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I'm back on Primby's account. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Blue Sky, joshloyd.bsky.social, on Twitter at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Also, thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms, and check out lockedondaily.com. You will find the best newsletters over there. All right, so I don't want to get into all of the details of stuff because I want this show to be more evergreen in terms of being able to view it. And I will talk about the nonsense that's happened to me the last couple of days. I'll save that at the end of the show. But this is a more long-term, straightforward show, which does directly tie to the fantasy playoffs for this season. But there's also value in it for any season, realistically, because the numbers and things that I'm going to present, they're going to be relevant everywhere. And it's relevant for any league. Now, I'm just going to be producing individual stats, but basically you just can turn those individual stats to talk about category value, or you can talk about fantasy points value. It's for everybody. It's for everyone. And this is something that I've hinted at a lot throughout the season. I've never really sat down and done the numbers on it, but I have. So this is the research. This is the numbers. This is the information. This is the info that I think we need about streaming. You've heard about streaming. Some of you will be going, what is actually streaming? No, it's not a Robert Kelly thing. It's separate. What is streaming? Streaming just means using one spot on your roster, two spots on your roster, whatever, and just churning through. You don't have to hold someone in that spot. You just go, I'll get this guy today. I'll get this guy the next day. I'll get this guy for two in a row. I'll get the next guy there. Now, how you all approach streaming is going to be very dependent on your individual league settings. The way that I had to run the numbers, because of course it's impossible for me to run the numbers for every single scenario. I can't do that. So I did it with the standard settings, which is a 12-team format, which is a 13-man roster with an injured slot, and 4 waiver moves per week. You might have 7, you might have 2, you might be unlimited. You might have all of that stuff, right? That's cool. You adjust all that stuff. The more moves you have, the more you can go hard on streaming. The fewer moves you have, the less interesting it becomes. You can't do it as much. The larger your rosters, the value of the players that you'd be streaming in lessens. So all of that stuff, I can't. It shouldn't be that hard to do the individual analysis on this. I just know that it's never been done. So, well, you know what? As I say that, maybe it has. Maybe somebody has published it, written work, or audio or video. I don't know. I'm pretty sure they haven't, but that doesn't matter either way. I've done it, and we're doing it now. So we're talking streaming. We're heading into the fantasy playoffs coming up now, and very soon anyway. And let's just take a look at how we are going to approach this, right? So we'll start. Well, that's what we're going to do here. Let's just go. Not looking at the end of this week because it's the All-Star break right at the moment. I haven't watched a second of the All-Star action. I'm just taking some time off, plus the other stuff that happened. And let's look at starting February the 24th because we're already in the middle of a matchup for most of you. So starting February the 24th. I'll run this through all the way through to the end of the season, including that final week. I won't put the numbers for that on the screen. That's a stupid week, but you shouldn't play fantasy in any of those last couple of weeks anyway, but beside the point. So, February 24th to March the 2nd, that is the next upcoming full week. There are 6 quality game days. And what is my quality game day assessment? It's based again on that standard roster size. 10 starters, 3 to 4 bench players. That means that if there are 9 NBA games on a day, or 8 or 7 or 6, so whatever it is, when you look at those games, so 9 or fewer, the general assumption should be for 85 to 90% of people, maybe 95% of people, is that you will have an open, active roster spot. If there are 10 games on, or 11 or 12 or 13. Once you get to 12, it's basically done. But if there are 10 on, we get to about like a 50% chance maybe. So that makes it one that I can't just universally say is a streaming day. So I don't count that as a quality game. So when there are 9 NBA games on a day, that is a quality game day. When there are 10 on, it is not. Right? It's not. That's how I view it. That is how all of the data that I've researched in the past on that seems to work out and give the result that gives the majority the right answer. So, starting the 24th of February through to the 2nd of March, there are 6 quality games in that week. The lowest amount of quality games that a team has in that week is 2. The week after, it is a completely streamable week, March the 3rd through to March the 9th. 7 quality games, 7 days. The lowest amount of quality games, which of course means the lowest amount of games played by a team, is 3. March 10 to March 16, we've got 5 quality game days. There are teams that play 1 quality game that week. Yes? Look at the next 3 weeks. March the 17th through to March the 24th. There are 4 quality game days that week. The lowest amount of quality games, well, there are teams that have 0. There are teams that do not play a single game on a day where there are fewer than 10 games on. March the 25th through to March the 30th, every day is streamable. There's 7 of them. The lowest amount of games there is 3. March the 31st through to April 6th, that is, these ones that are on the screen at the moment, by the way, this is default Yahoo playoffs. It's not the playoffs that I recommend. It is default Yahoo though. Terrible dates, but that is what it is. March 31st to April 6th, which is the default Yahoo Championship week. There are 5 quality game days on. And there is one of those, and the lowest amount of quality games a particular team has is 1. The final week, which is a week that gets played for some reason as a default week on ESPN, is an insane week. There are only 2 quality game days that week. And that, of course, that means that the lowest amount of quality games that a team plays is 0. The final 3 days of the season are not streamable. 15 games, 0 games, 15 games. Now, it will become streamable for certain reasons because you'll be able to drop players that are fake injured or sitting and adding in the most random bloke that you've ever heard of. Shout out to top 10 player Kyle Filipowski. But who knows what that is the dumbest period to be playing fantasy. It's a dumb section with 15, 0, and 15 over the final 3 days of the week. So that week's got 2 quality game days with a minimum of 0. So we've got all that info there, right? And then we're going to look at how does that translate into streaming? We'll get that in a sec. Today's episode, though, is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, DoorDash has got a great offer for you now. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player scores 50 points in a game or more, you score a huge deal the next day. When any player scores 50 during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 the next day from noon through to midnight. So you might be there watching your favorite player. Maybe Taylor Horton-Tucker has a 50-point game at some point in April. Who knows? Or you can celebrate ordering a THD special pizza. Get that delivered, get your 50% off. Done. Bang. Easy. It might be one of your other faves that's dropping a big banger of a scoring night. Maybe Rui Hachimura goes crazy and he scores 50. Well, you can get that 50% order the next day from noon onwards. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Cool. Do that. That'd be great. All right. So, you get just a teaser. I'll give the full story later. Teaser again. My whole hard drive stopped working on Friday. That's why there was, for me, Friday, that was why there was no Thursday recap. Everything was gone. Right. So I had to get emergency tech support out to get it replaced. Mostly everything of my stuff is saved in the cloud. That's all good. So all my files and that were there. But then it's just about getting the hard drive replaced, fixed, installed, reset up, and then getting all of my programs re-downloaded, reinstalled, and getting all of the settings set back, all of the scenes recreated for my broadcast software. For people who ask, they go, what do you use? I use OBS. That is what I use to broadcast the stuff. So getting all of those scenes redone, making sure all the settings are correct. I hope that everything is coming across well, and there might be a couple of things that are a little bit off, but that is why, if it is, because everything had to be rebooted, reset, reinstalled, reset up, which took a lot of time to get to where I was before. Thankfully, most of the stuff was easily able to be recovered in terms of the individual files and templates and all that sort of stuff, but the actual programs and their individual settings just took a little bit of extra time, and I hope that I was able to get that all correct. I don't know, but we'll find out as we go through, won't we? All right. So we are talking streaming, like I said. Let's look at what happens now if we use, and what the general rule is again, 4 streaming moves for the week, 4 waiver moves for the week. And the general thing that you would do is you would have 1 streaming spot available. That's a general rule. Well, based on all those numbers, the 6 weeks left in that season, plus that final week, which I did include in the numbers, and if I didn't, the difference would actually be larger. All right. If we look at the average quality games per week, it's 5.14 over these 7-week period. If I take off the final week of the season, it's 5.66 quality games per week, quality game days per week. You can call them quality games, you can call them low volume days, whatever you want to do. The old LVDs, right? So 5.6 if you exclude the final week, 5.1 otherwise. There is, if you decide that you are not going to stream, and you're going to hold on to a player, right, there is a chance that player, if in that worst, the idea of holding, it doesn't mean that you're that one particular player, but the minimum amount of quality games that I showed you with those teams, where there are teams that have this many quality games, holding on to that player means that you would get 1.43 quality games on average per week. If we exclude the final week, it's 1.66. Obviously, that wouldn't be the same player every week because their quality games would go up and down. But just talking about whoever your worst player is, getting those low quality games, that is the number you would get. So basically, from streaming 1 slot with 4 moves, and I went through all of these weeks, because sometimes when you look at these, there might be 6 quality game days on during a week. And the way that the schedule is set up, it actually becomes impossible to stream all of those days because you don't have enough moves to hit the right back-to-backs. The back-to-backs aren't present in certain spots, so you can't do it. I went through every one of these days, and for every quality game day, if you've got 4 moves during the week, you can actually get that amount of games through that roster spot, which doesn't always happen that way, but you can do that all the way through. So if there's 5 quality games one week, you can get 5 games in with 4 roster moves. If there are 7 quality games in, you can get 7 extra games through 1 roster spot with 4 moves. That's what I was able to work out. So you get, basically, especially if you're excluding that final week of the season, 5.66 games through streaming, 1.66 through not streaming. Basically 4 extra games per week as a general rule. And I know you'll say that that's not the same play you hold, but we'll get to all that. We'll get to how that sort of works out. And you can do this in your fantasy playoffs, you can get a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more brutal. What you can do is you can start to stream 2 slots. You've still only got 4 moves, but you can stream 2 slots. So how would it look? Well, if you stream 2 slots, the average is 8.86 quality games per week. If you exclude the final week, it's 9.66. If you are holding onto that spot, you can get an average of 3.86 quality games. Or excluding the final week, it's 4.33. Now, I did that a little bit different. What I did is for the 2 streaming slots, because the likelihood that you would have 2 players on your team who have the lowest amount of quality games, who are also the back end of your roster, is pretty unlikely, right? I'll grant that's pretty unlikely. So what I did was I gave it so that you would have the minimum quality game number plus the second player would have the minimum quality game number plus 1. Now, some days it'll be worse. Some days you'll have just your 2 of your worst 4 players play the lowest amount of quality games. But the way that I did it to try and make it fair, I did lowest amount of quality games for 1 slot and lowest amount of quality games plus 1 for the other. So that gave us an average of 4.33 versus 9.66. So again, we're still getting an extra 5 games per week by using 2 slots. You'll remember, maybe you won't, but if you do want to remember, we had for the 1 slot, we got 4 extra games per week. So using the 2 slots gives you a bit of an advantage. It's not as big though, because you run into the problem with 2 roster slots and 4 moves. You can't actually, like, so if there's 7 quality games for the week, you can't actually get 14 games in. You can't do that with the restrictions on how many ads you can make. The most you can get in is 10. All right, so the most you can get in is 10 in those weeks. In other weeks, you can get, like, I've got all these numbers here. You can get, like, so if I look at my 2-slot streaming weeks, you get 10, 10, 10, 8, 10, 10, and the final week you can only get 4 games in extra. But like 10, 10, 10, 8, 10, 10. But whereas if I was just to double the 1-slot stream, it would be 12, 14, 10, 8, 14, 10. So you'll see that when you get to 2, using 4 moves per week, you can't just actually double it. So while in terms of bulk volume, yes, you get more. 4 games extra versus 5 games extra, it's a difference. But it's not a straight, well, I got 4 games extra here by using 1 slot, so surely I'll get 8 by using the other one. No, it doesn't work that way. So it's an advantage, and it is probably worth doing. And it also, remember, I've used the quality game, minimum quality game, and the minimum quality game plus 1 to get that 3.86 average, or 4.33 if you look excluding the final week. But if you had 2 players on your roster who were the minimum quality game guys each week, you would end up with 3.33, which would give you 6 extra games, which makes it, again, a little bit more interesting. But I think that putting the 5 there is probably the correct way to approach that. So now, I guess the question we have is like, does streaming work? What's your gut feel? I know that if you're watching a video, you can see it now, but what's your gut feel on this? And I'm sure you're going to have questions about this, and that's cool. I want that. So this is how I did it. Like, there's no real set right way to do this. So I went through my rest of season projections on Basketball Monster, and for, I'm mainly using head-to-head category leagues, but it works for points leagues too. So I did the analysis on category leagues, but again, it is all the same for points. I use my -1 head-to-head weighted ranking numbers, which is the reference number for rankings that I use all the way through. I've also got Durant as there, which it all just moves through to the same system, right? So what I thought I would look at is the average of players who I have projected to be ranked 100th through to about 170. I think that gives a decent coverage of players who will be the back 1 or 2 roster players in a standard league. I think that's a fair way of looking at it. I think, yes. And I wanted to do all of those guys who were rostered in over 70% of leagues according to our advanced metric on Basketball Monster. Just widely rostered players who will be sitting at the back end of rosters ranked rest of season 100 to 170. So not like a random guy that, hey, I think this guy might pop off, Karlo Makovic, and he sits there at 140th, and I include him in those numbers, but you'll go, well, no one's rostering him, he's not that guy. And I get that, right? So like that's why I wanted to do it. Over 70% rostered, ranked between 100 and 170 projected rest of season. So if we count that sort of an idea again, so that's it. We're getting an average. So we talk about, hey, if I've got this guy versus this guy might play 3 this week, he might play 1, whatever it is. This is trying to encapsulate this. So on average, we're holding that spot. We've got 1.4 quality games. If you are watching on YouTube, I think it's a good idea to come and watch the YouTube to double bang if you haven't done that already, because you can see here for that spot, if you're holding that player, on average, you're going to get 17.6 points, 2.1 threes, 7.3 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.2 steals, 1 block, and they shoot about 47 and 77%. So that's that hypothetical back-end player on your roster. 2 back-end players, maybe. Right? That's the value of them. That's not average. That is the value that they would get on an average of 1.4 games for that roster slot. I then went to look at, my projections. Anyone ranked between 100 rest of season and 200 who were less than 55% rostered on the advanced roster metric on Basketball Monster. Remember, the advanced roster metric, I'm going to do a show on this at some point this week as well. The advanced roster metric is very different to the Yahoo percentage, where the Yahoo percentage, you'll see a must roster player, Isaiah Collier, sitting at 30, where he's been at 100% on Basketball Monster for the last 5 weeks or 4 weeks. Right? It's a more responsive sort of way, I think, of doing it. Some might even say it's like almost like a double onyx, diamond, titanium, platinum, palladium level way to look at it. Some might say that. Not me. So I looked at players projected between 100 and 200 who are less than 55% rostered, and we've got the ability to stream through an average of that number 5.1 games per week. So what does that give you? 51.4 points. And you want to contrast that to holding? 17.6. Yikes. 7.2 threes versus 2.1. 23 rebounds versus 7.3. 12.5 assists versus 4. 4.9 steals versus 1.2. 2.6 blocks versus 1. The percentages, you might think that those players picked that aren't as rostered as much and back-end guys, the percentages will just kill you. Well, the average field goal percentage was 45.6, not just averaging the field goal percentage, but averaging makes and misses. And the average free throws was 78.5. And for contrast, the back-end roster guy was 46.9, the streaming guy 45.6 from the field, so 1.3%. But the free throws on the other under-rostered guys, which is really does tie into some of the stuff that we've found through streaming shows this season, is you can actually stream free throw percentage off the waiver wire pretty easily this season. Those guys are 78.5 versus 76.5 on the hold guy. So, very clear win if you're able to get that. If you've got one of these guys sitting at the back, this 100 to 170, you've got 1.4 games out of him, and you're able to grab this less than 55% rostered player, multiple of them, stream them through. That's why I've got a range of 100 players there to be able to stream through multiple guys. That's the average. It's a pretty clear win. But I know what you're thinking. You're probably saying, Josh, but those numbers in my league, the most competitive league in the world, we actually, when you lose a matchup, we chop off a finger. Actually got so extreme, we chopped off someone's dick last week. That's how bad the loss was. No, I know that's what happens. I can't up the punishments. That's what happens. So we'll come back and we're going to talk about the way that we sort of squeeze these margins in. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, when the NBA action tips off, that's not the end of the betting, because FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, has got you covered. Live betting with FanDuel all through the game means even after the game starts, there are certain things that you can look at, take advantage of, and get your action going. You might want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback. You might want to bet on an individual quarter-based player prop. It's all there, all of your live bets, and you can combine them into a same-game parlay on FanDuel as well. Right now, new customers on FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. Okay, so we looked at that screen. I'll put it back up for you guys. The base idea, the best case scenario of the guy that you hold versus the guys that you can stream in. But let's tighten that up a little bit. All right, let's tighten that up a little bit. What if instead of me looking at guys who are less than 55% rostered on Basketball Monster, we go to under 40%? How does that change things? Because obviously you're looking at players who are more widely available and not as rostered in the for your double onyxes out there. Well, does it change much? Not really. The points become 49.9 versus 17.6. The threes become 6.9 versus 2.1. Rebounds 23.6 to 7.3. Assists 12.7 to 4. Steals 4.9 to 1.2. Blocks 2.6 to 1. Field goal percentage the same. Free throws the same. It's the same stuff. Now, there is a valid argument to make here, and you can say this: if you are streaming in this roster spot, with your 5.1 quality games per week, and you're generating whatever it is there, 4.9 steals or 2.6 blocks on average out of that position. You go, well, if I wanted steals, I'll just hit a steals guy. He might get me 2 steals per game, and then that really changes that number. It does, you're right. It does, but that's why I'm providing averages here. In fact, that argument actually even further validates the streaming idea. Because if you start hitting, well, I'm only going to win 3 categories, I'm going to target my steals and assists. Why couldn't you get 22 assists and 10 steals instead of the average of 12.7 and 5? It's a big difference. And most of these numbers are like 3 times the value of holding on to someone in that spot. That's hot streak. It's hot streak insulation, basically. It's basically hot streak insulation. Now, I'm trying to anticipate the questions that the skeptics out there might have. And I don't know if there is any, to be honest. There might be, but maybe they're questioning the scientific method, and that's okay as well. But you'll say, well, you're using this spot that you're holding on your roster of 1.4 quality games, and it's like you're ranking players 100 to 170. But when we head to the fantasy playoffs, it's the best teams there. They've probably got a more stacked roster. They probably don't have anybody who's sitting outside the top 150 on their roster. They probably don't have that. And yeah, fair. That's fair. So what I now would do is I looked at players that I projected between 100 and 125 who were rostered in over 80% of leagues. So highly rostered players who theoretically, if they're ranked between 100 and 125, for a whole league's worth of action, these are guys that would be starters in a 12-team league. But we make the assumption, the concession, that the teams that push further into the playoffs, the good teams, the more active teams, their worst player might be the 120th best player, which would be a starter on every other team in the league. All right, so that's what 100 to 125, over 80% rostered. Versus the 100 to 200, less than 40% rostered version. How did that work? Yeah, it's still a destruction. 20 points versus 50. I'm just going to round numbers up here. 2.5 threes to 7. 7 rebounds to 24. 5 assists to 13. 1.5 steals to 5. A block to 2.6. Percentages, again, the same. The difference you have, though, with the percentages is that in the one when you're holding onto it, you have more volume per game, but obviously less volume overall because you don't stream it in. And when the numbers are very similar, and you'll notice that the free throw percentages and the field goals, they're all sort of just marginally below average, meaning that like with the increased volume from streaming that in, that it might actually impact your percentages down a little bit. And that's a fair argument. But percentages are incredibly volatile week to week, game to game. Some of the most volatile numbers we have. So that, and you'll notice again, there's not that big of a difference in the overall percentages. And when you're talking an average of 45.4 field goals versus 46.1, well, that number can go anywhere. That 46.1 could be 49, it could be 43. The 45.4 in a week from a player could be 42, it could be 47, could be 48, could be 50. So relying upon those numbers to be static across the course of the week, impossible to do. The larger your sample size is, which is what you do through streaming, the more you can actually buffer bunches of variance. So, all right, we did that one. And you go, Josh, but I'm better than that. I'm way better than that. My team is so stacked, man. And I've had this question asked to me before, so that's why I wanted to do it. They said, my team is so good, Josh. Do I even need to stream? Because my roster's all top 100 guys. And in the past, I went, okay, that's interesting. Like, I hadn't done the work, and I hadn't done the research, and I thought, okay, well, if your roster's all top 100 guys, you actually just might be able to get away with holding through that spot. If your worst player is still a top 100 player, does it make sense to just hold them? No, it actually doesn't. It doesn't really at all. So I went between players ranked between 70 and 100. No roster percentage needed there. Just anyone who's considered, I believe, a top 100 guy rest of season versus the guys 100 to 200 who are less than 40% rostered. Yeah, like the gap closes, but 50 to 22 in points, 7 to 2.5 threes, 24 to 8 in rebounds, 13 to 5.5 assists, 5 to 1.6 steals, 2.6 blocks to a block, and percentages, you'll be shocked to know, the same. Again, 46 and 47 and 77 and 77, the same. Again. So, what if we go in further? What if you go, Josh, I don't like that you're using the players ranked 100 to 200. How many guys rest of season that are projected for you to be a top, just outside the top 100 who are less than 40% rostered? Like in my league, they're all snapped up. Like we've got nothing on our waiver wire. All right, let's do the next one. So we're going to use the same numbers at the top. We're going to use 70 to 100, holding the 1.4 streaming slots. And then with the other one, we're going to do 175 to 225, who are less than 20% rostered, is in our advanced metric, which probably, this ties more now into like 14-team leagues, but not even, because in 14-team leagues, there's almost no chance that your best player is a top one, or your worst player is a top 100 guy. So how does that track? If we go, in the streaming option includes nobody who I project to be top 175 rest of season, and all of them are 80% available using our metric. It's 22 points versus 49. Okay. 5.5 threes to 2.6. 24 rebounds to 7.8. 11.3 assists to 5.5. 4.2 steals to 1.6. 2.9 blocks to 0.9. Percentages, 48 from the streaming slot, 46.6 from the hold spot. Free throws, 77 versus 76. The same. Yeah, like the volume of the counting stats decreases the more that we like narrow this, meaning your last roster spot is a top 100 guy and all you can get is a guy ranked 180th. You can grab multiple top 180, top 225 guys and stream them in. And still, and again, this ties into fantasy points as well, because all you got to do is count those numbers up for fantasy points. And still, using that back end spot on your roster is just like, it's just way different. It's just way more advantageous. So let's take it another step. What if in that final roster spot where I've got 1.4 quality games on average we're holding, what if I do it so that I add just an extra quality game onto that, make it 2.4 quality games? So like the idea that you would only be, you would have someone on your roster every week who was the lowest amount of quality games, right? I've just said, screw it, we're not doing that. We're doing one extra quality game per week. So it goes from 1.4 quality games to 2.4. And how does that compare to streaming that in, which is 5.1 on average? Again, we're looking at the worst players, top 100. The best option you can get is a top 175 guy off the wire. Does the gap narrow? Yeah, of course it does. It's pretty significantly. But 49 points versus 37. Okay. 5.5 threes to 4.5 threes. 24 rebounds to 13 rebounds. What you notice here is that, the rebounding thing is, there's a lot of rebounding off the wire, it seems like. 11 assists to 9. 4.2 steals to 2.7. 2.9 blocks to 1.6. 48 to 47 and 76 to 77 in percentages. That stays the same. So this is the scenario where your worst player is a top 100 player and your worst 2 or 3 guys on your roster all play at least one game over the minimum amount of quality games for that week. And still, the streaming works. Now, this one becomes a little bit more iffy because there's like 12 points difference and 1.13, which can easily be changed. So the buffer you have there is not as big, obviously. And if you're in this situation where your worst player, is top 100, and your worst 2 players, none of them play minimum quality games ever, and the only players available are outside the top 180, well, in that case, I go, maybe, even though the numbers still don't get there, but variance might tip it. It becomes a little bit more of a coin flip. But still, the numbers seem to be favoring the idea of volume. And I say all this now, right? I don't like that fantasy basketball, the way that it's set up, rewards streaming as a strategy. That is why the leagues that I put out do not reward that. You cannot get this advantage in the leagues that I do because I don't believe that it is the best way to be playing fantasy. I don't believe it at all. But for the majority of you, vast majority of you, this is how your leagues are set up, and this is how you win. This is how you win. It is not debatable. Because if your opponent doesn't want to do this and they're too afraid to cut their 110th ranked player, they will lose. You will gain, unless like the top end of their roster is so much better. And all that comes into it, right? But they do not get an advantage by that strategy. That's maybe the better way of putting it. There is no advantage in that, well, my team is all great and I've got my worst guys 110th. They will lose an advantage by not streaming that spot. So let's give some hypotheticals here, because I think this is interesting. Now, again, this is based on my projections rest of season. Shout out, tell me if you can guess who these players are, let me know. Player A there is a top 100 player projected rest of season. I think actually he's projected around 76th or something. All right, whatever. I've got him projected 18 points, 2.5 threes, 3.7 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.2 blocks, 45 and 87. Player B, he's ranked outside the top 175. I think I got him at 189 maybe he was. He's at 9.9 points, 1.7 threes, 3.9 boards, 1.9 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.6 blocks, 39.9 from the field, and 79 from the line. So that's your worst player that's in the top 100 versus who's this guy that's available in a lot of spots outside the top 175, top 180, whatever. That's how their numbers play out, because we're using that as more of an example. So if we do that with the 1.4 quality games versus 5.1, again, we know that individual player himself is not going to play 5.1 quality games per week. It's more just a snapshot. I just want it because I want to end up getting to those players to show you who they are. And we know that the player that's 180th and the player 170th, the player that's 200th, they're all pretty similar. And they all should evoke the same level of ugh. So that top 100 player with 1.4 quality games, 25, 3.6 threes, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.3 steals, 0.3 blocks, 45-87. Player B, who's the spud at the back end there, 51, 8.5 threes, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, 4 steals, 3 blocks, 40 and 79. 1.4 quality games versus 5.1. Do you know who they are? Do you know who these players are? Player A is, again, I've projected his assists down because Luka Doncic has joined that team. Player A, if my thing ever pops up, is Austin Reeves. Player B is Patrick Williams. That's the quality level of players that we're talking about. If you stream a Patrick Williams type player and are able to get 5.1 games out of that slot, you sizably outperform an Austin Reeves level player. Not top 10 Austin Reeves while Luka was out and Davis was out and LeBron was missing. The Reeves that I project with LeBron and Luka playing full minutes and doing their full thing. Patrick Williams, a stream of a Patrick Williams type player, is double the value of holding an Austin Reeves type player. I'm not saying that Austin Reeves is a drop. It's not what I'm saying here. Because, again, it's all about individual matchups and in category leagues and balancing your individual needs. And maybe Reeves is better than the 4.5 assists that I project with Luka and LeBron there. I don't really see that happening, but maybe he is. But to me, I tried to pick extreme/funny examples, but I think that those sort of players really does sort of hit it home, I think. So that's it. The definitive, maybe, look at streaming. Again, I've been sort of pontificating these numbers all through the season and saying, well, I think maybe you can get 5.5 games through a streaming slot and see how that works. But it looks about 5.1. We can just say, well, it's 5.6 if you include that last week. So I think 5.5 was the correct number for me. And again, the average minimum quality games was 1.4. So if we just do it as a roundabout 5.5, let's just do 5 versus 2, right, through a streaming slot throughout the course of the season. 3 extra games. It's an absolute no-brainer. If you want to win, like getting that extra volume in, it's really important. And the more you head through defense, again, I don't like that it is the way that it is. But it is the way that it is. And that's how it is. So I hope that you guys found something interesting in that. Again, I really do like doing these sort of researchy based shows because I'm always trying to improve this stuff. It's very easy for me to come out and say, and just talk about a player. This player did this last game, therefore you must grab him. Unbelievable. You grabbed him. He was good. Wow, I can't believe he wasn't good the next game. Like, what's that? That's nothing. Yes, so we try to put research, try to be, it sounds wanky, but I try to be groundbreaking, stuff that hasn't been done or researched or proven or shown or backed up or whatever it is. I think that's what that's what we get with this. And I hope that it is something that you're able to take out of it. These are for the next 6 to 7 weeks of the season, using those numbers, but I think those numbers they're gonna carry through all through every season in the NBA. These are the numbers that will be there. There's more advantage in streaming 2 slots than 1, but it's not a double. It's a 1.5 times, a 1.7 times effect, whatever it is. It's not double. And that value of those guys, because of the way that rankings and valuations get spread out, that the guy that's sitting at 120 is not that different from the guy that's at 180. And if you can get 3 to 4 more games in from that guy at 180, well, yeah, that top guy cannot get past that. That's why so often we're trying to hunt upside. Whereas I don't care if you dropped, let me think of a name, Bilal Koulibaly, for example. Or if you drop let's use Kyle Kuzma or someone like that, right? Where unless multiple things happen, they're going to sort of sit where they are. But if you take a chance on or Nick Richards, right? Nick Richards. Would you hold Nick Richards? Maybe there's a chance he's the 110th best player. I'll take the 120th best guy off my waiver wire. That's great value. Is it? Whereas I can stream that spot in, get more value than it, plus try and hit a Bolt, try and hit Makovic, try and hit Bozalis, try and hit Alvarado, whoever it is. Because that player then, A, might turn into a top 60 guy, which is incredibly valuable, or there's more value in streaming that slot anyway. We hold on to our back-end R-seeders for too long. And it's not necessary. Unless you can see an easy way outside of, hey, I'm going to try and predict a fluke injury. Unless you can see an easy way for this guy to become a top 70 player, most of those guys are relatively expendable towards the back end of your draft. Expendable/replaceable. Hope that makes sense. Guys, it was hard for me over the last few days with all this stuff for the computer. I was dreading everything that I would need to do. Reinstall everything. Are all my files okay? How long is this going to take? I need to do work. I need to get this done. I can't believe it. But I sit here and I preach a level of positivity of doing something good, right? And while it was annoying, I got myself down and went, you know what? This couldn't have happened in season at a better time. I missed one recap show the last day before All-Star break. I was having the next 2 days off anyway, and I had them off. I got it fixed. It's all set to go. It couldn't have been a better time. If that had happened last Friday on trade deadline day, screwed. But it didn't. So now I'm going to reassess a lot of my processes and getting backups and backup computers and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I did good. I thanked the luck factor, but also now just move into trying to plan it better. Not planning a breakout or a breakdown, but planning a contingency. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.